Hello, everybody. This is part 2 of the EOC review. This part 2 will only cover progressivism. So if you're already in U.S. history in the fall semester, you've already learned this. Obviously, you can watch it anyway, but here we go. Let's get started. Okay, so progressivism. Look at the root word. Progress. This is a time period of progress. It is a time period of more government intervention. It is a time period of cleaner streets, better fire safety. Labor unions are striking and having some success in getting better working conditions. Children are going to leave the factories soon and get into elementary school. So this was a time of reform. Okay, this is a time where the government is going to step in to try to do better. I mean, we don't always want government in our face, but we definitely want some protections that the government gives us. I will explain what I mean by that. These are the goals of progressivism. Temperance, that is the movement to get rid of alcohol. Okay, believe it or not, that is success, but we'll talk about that in a second. Political reforms, suffrage for women, better working conditions, more government regulation. Usually the good kind, not the bad kind. Okay? All right, now, Jane Addams, she was a social reformer, and she was one of the first women to have a PhD in the United States. So she had a lot of time on her hands, so she and her girlfriend got together and created what are called settlement houses to give immigrant children an elementary school education. It was called settlement houses, also called the Hull House up in Chicago. I've never seen Hull House, but I have seen settlement houses. This is the only time I've seen that on the EOC. Which of these is a major goal of Jane Addams' settlement house movement in Chicago? One of the goals was to assimilate immigrants, meaning teach them English, teach them job skills, the good kind of assimilation, not the bad kind. All right, the temperance movement. Women were suffering from their husbands coming home Saturday night after 6 days of working in the factory, and sometimes they'd come home Saturday night drunk and say, "Honey, I spent my entire paycheck. I'm so sorry." Okay, and what are you supposed to do back then? You know, you have 10 kids or 7 kids. What are you supposed to do? There weren't any jobs for women with 7 kids, really. And you know, you think if your husband would just stop drinking, you know, everything would be okay. But what women did was they got together and they managed to get the country to outlaw alcohol. And they did this without having the right to vote. You got to give women credit for that. They did this before they got the right to vote. So memorize the 18th Amendment. It outlawed alcohol. That's called the Prohibition Amendment. And then in 1933, 13 years later, the 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment. It made alcohol legal again. So a way to remember this is you can't drink when you're 18, but you can when you're 21. Okay? Ratification, this is important. I've seen this word plenty on the EOC. It's when you sign a law and it becomes law, and you date it, stamp it, whatever, and then it actually comes into effect. Okay? So look at this question. Which of these contributed to the ratification of the 18th Amendment? Okay. So hit pause if you need to. The answer is B. Okay? Women, you got to give women credit for this, okay? All right, now we talked about political machines. These guys weren't all bad. They did help a lot of people, immigrants, get settled into this country, but they were corrupt. These immigrants were corrupt. So we had to get rid of them. They would just give their friends jobs that weren't qualified for jobs, and then they would punish neighborhoods for not voting for them. You know, and this is Boss Tammany, and he was the mayor, political boss of New York City for a long time. And they did help immigrants, but they were corrupt. And we need a system in this country where people get jobs because they qualify for it. So when you give jobs to your friends, that's called the spoils system. Hey, Frankie, you helped me get elected last time, so I'm going to make you the garbage commissioner. Yeah, you don't know nothing about garbage, but that's okay. You're my buddy. And that's not how we want this country to work. So how should you get a job? You should apply for the job, and you should maybe take a civil service exam. Civil service reform says that government jobs are given to qualified candidates, not as favors. It's the merit system. So today, in a lot of states, you have what are called civil service exams, and they will help you to get government jobs. You should look into it. It might benefit you somehow. Okay. So, which issue is this cartoon addressing? Okay. Notice the facial expression of Uncle Sam. Is that a good one or a bad one? That's an evil one. And Uncle Sam, symbolic of the government, is just giving out free pies to everyone. And fat back then meant you were rich and corrupt. Which issue is this cartoon addressing? It is addressing the issue of political corruption. Okay? So if you said C, civil service reform is how you would fix the corruption, or at least try to. But it's addressing the issue of corruption. Okay? The cartoon refers to the corruption and greed of the politicians using the spoils system to increase their own power. What reform provided a solution for this problem? And the answer is civil service reform. Okay, so it was a way to try to get rid of all corruption in local governments and state governments. Okay. All right, so we're talking about political reform. So if you get elected to governor or mayor, sometimes, depending on where you are, if the people are sick of you, they can have what's called a recall election, meaning they kick you out of office. They don't just wait until election day. You know, they don't wait till your 4-year term is up. They could have an election in 2 years. Like 10 years ago, Arnold Schwarzenegger became governor of California because of a recall election. The Californians did not like this governor, so they kicked him out of office, and then they elected Arnold Schwarzenegger to be governor of California. So think of it as like a safety recall. We want to call it back. We want to bring it back. If you're a politician, you're fired. We want to recall you. Okay. These are also political reforms. Initiative is when it allows people to get like 10,000 signatures to put something on the ballot up for a vote. And once you get enough signatures, then when you actually put it on the ballot, it becomes a referendum. So initiative and referendum go hand in hand. The big picture is this: more people power. More people power. More direct participation in the process by people. Okay? So back in 2016, there was a referendum in the state of Maine to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Okay, so in order to get that referendum on the ballot, you had to get thousands of signatures from people in the state of Maine. Okay, tens of thousands maybe. And then there's the secret ballot. So that what that's going to do is it's going to hurt the political machines, because now they can't threaten you. You better vote for the mayor. You know, nobody knows who you vote for anymore. All right. The 17th Amendment also leads to more people power. The 17th Amendment says that the people vote for who the United States senators are, the kind that go to Washington, D.C. Okay, so these guys are the senators from Texas. Right now, John Cornyn is running for election against M.J. Hedger. Okay, but before the 17th Amendment, the state Congress down in Austin would choose who our senators are. Okay, so more people power, more direct participation in the process. The 16th Amendment says that people need to pay income tax. That sounds bad, but now Carnegie's going to have to pay. Rockefeller's going to have to pay. Okay? And a lot of people are going to have to pay. So, and plus, we need this money to build a navy, to build an army. You know, if we're going to be a big, powerful country, we're going to need to build our navy and build our army, and that's going to cost money. So here's a cartoon about rich people crying because they have to go to the U.S. Treasury to pay their taxes. All right. The creation of initiative, referendum, and recall procedures during the Progressive era resulted in what? Hit pause if you need to, but the answer is more people power. Okay? The reform which allowed people to petition for the removal of an elected official is what? The answer is recall. Okay. During the Progressive era, one goal of state-level political reformers was to what? Hit pause if you need to. More people power. The answer is C, direct democracy. Okay? All right. Just remember this. The Populist Party was a third party, and they were all about the poor, specifically the farmers. And this is really should be in the Gilded Age, but the Populist Party came about to fight for the farmers, to fight against the railroads for the farmers' benefit. And they wanted more free coinage, meaning more silver in the money supply. Why? To create inflation. Why? Because inflation means that your debt is worth less. I'm not saying that they got this, but that's what they wanted. So populism is about fighting for the farmers' behalf. Okay. So this is I've only seen the Populist Party maybe once on the EOC, but not the greatest question, but let's do it. Why did the Populist Party want free coinage of silver? To increase the amount of money in circulation. What that's going to do is it's going to lead to inflation and a drop in the value of their debt, because farmers are always in debt. Okay. Thomas Edison, light bulb, electricity. It means that factories can run at night. It means you can have a night shift and a day shift. It means we're going to have movie theaters. It means that we're going to have sports at night. It's going to change the world forever. And it's not just the light bulb, but it's what you plug the light bulb into. And then it's the electricity that runs everything. That's going to change the world forever. Okay? So how did the invention shown in this patent illustration affect industry? The answer is D. Factories could extend working hours. Okay? Which statement best explains how the application of electricity in the early 1900s affected the development of the U.S. economy? All right, let me tell you something, and this is going to help you on your EOC. Technology makes everything faster, cheaper, more efficient. Faster, cheaper, more efficient. Electricity is a technology, so it's going to make everything faster, cheaper, more efficient. So the answer is C. Okay? All right, muckrakers. Think of muck. Think of it as like mud or crap or something like that. A muckraker is an investigative journalist. someone who writes these in-depth expose pieces on big businesses and bad government, okay? And so these muckrakers, what they would do is they would rake up the muck. They would just dig up the dirt, and they would try to root out corruption, whether in government or in big business. So muckrakers meant well, okay? Jacob Riis, he was a photographer, and he would go around with this new thing invented called the flash, and he could take photographs at night. And he would show these pictures to rich people and say, look at how the poor are living. And he would raise money for these poor people. He would get playgrounds built and indoor plumbing. So he did his part, Jacob Riis. I've never seen his name, but he was a muckraker. I've never seen his name on the EOC. Now, I have seen this guy, and I see him every test I've ever seen. The Jungle is a book written by a muckraker called Upton Sinclair. That's his name, Upton Sinclair. And he wrote this book about the grossness and disgustingness of the meatpacking industry. As a result of this gross, disgusting book, the government is going to come along and start regulating the food industry. More government intervention. Okay? So instead of laissez-faire government, now you've got the government inspecting the meat and then regulating the drugs. Okay? So before the progressive era, you could sell this kind of stuff. Okay? This fake cures like fat off obesity cream. You rub it on your belly and it makes your belly disappear. Yeah, right. Electromagnetic bathing fluid. What the hell? What are you talking about? Cocaine toothache drops. Now that sounds like fun. Okay? Or just heroin. Imagine going to CVS and just buying heroin because you have a cough. Okay? So the FDA doesn't let you do that anymore. So more government intervention. So because of women's groups and because of Upton Sinclair and his book, The Jungle, it led to the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. Okay? So think of Upton Sinclair as a muckraker, just digging up the dirt. So more government intervention. Look at him inspecting the meat packing plants. Less laissez-faire. I've never seen her on the EOC. Ida Tarbell risked her life writing exposés on Standard Oil and Rockefeller. Ida B. Wells, I've seen her once. She wrote about lynchings in the South. She fought for women's suffrage, especially black women's suffrage, but for women's suffrage and civil rights for African Americans. She wrote these long exposés on that too. All right, so these achievements illustrate Ida B. Wells' contributions as a what? All right, hit pause. The answer is an advocate of equality. Which groups were most influential in passing the Pure Food and Drug Act? And the answer is C, muckrakers and women's organizations. Women were really starting to come around during this time period. How did the publication of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle contribute to a change in the relationship between government and business? Okay, so was it more government intervention or less government intervention? The answer is B. In his quote, "Men with the muck rake are often indispensable to the well-being of society, but only if they know when to stop raking the muck." Theodore Roosevelt was referring to what? So Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, was talking about muckrakers. So hit pause. The answer is C. So you got a quote from Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. Public response to revelations such as the one in this excerpt led to the establishment of regulations that were eventually enforced by the what? The answer is A. It's not B. That's like for coronavirus or zombie outbreaks, stuff like that. But it's A. Labor unions started to get some successes during this time period. They would go on strike. They would stop the factories from running. Sometimes the factory owners would hire armies of men with bats and guns possibly and horses to come beat up strikers. People would die. Things would get set on fire. Sometimes the strikers would win. Sometimes the strikers would get beat up and fired. But it was a fight. It was a fight. And some women were involved too, as you can see. Okay, this is what the labor union wanted right here. And as a matter of fact, the prohibitionists, the people who wanted to outlaw alcohol, and said, you know what, if we had an 8-hour workday, then maybe men wouldn't want to drink so much. So the labor unions and the prohibitionists started to work together to get an 8-hour workday and a 40-hour, 5-day work week. Okay. Progressives got laws passed that prohibited child labor. Get these kids out of the factory and put them in school. Get her into elementary school. Better workplace safety laws. Better fire safety laws, sprinklers, fire exits. All right, here's a multiple choice. Remember I said you will have questions on what time period are we talking about. The issue addressed by this poster is primarily associated with what? Okay, so what is the issue addressed by this poster? The issue is child labor. So this issue of child labor is associated with the what? I would have guessed the Gilded Age, but since they dealt with it in the Progressive era, the answer is A. Okay? The events in these visuals were labor union responses to the what? So labor unions were responding to, and the answer is C, abuses by big business. All right, Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive president. He actually ran for president as a third party. Okay, I don't think he won as a progressive, but he ran as a progressive. He was the youngest president in history at the time. I think he still is. One thing that he's known for is the national parks system. Teddy Roosevelt was by the way, his name is pronounced Roosevelt, but no big deal. He wanted to preserve land because he was afraid that the factories were going to just take over everything. He was a hunter, so he wanted to preserve nature so he could shoot it. Okay. Now look at this quote. The great corporations which we have grown to speak of rather loosely as trusts are the creatures of the state, the government. And the state not only has the right to control them, but it is duty bound to control them whenever the need of such control is shown. So Teddy Roosevelt is talking about busting up the trust. Here he is busting up the beef trust. I don't know exactly what that is, but Teddy Roosevelt wanted to bust up the trust. Think about like Rockefeller and the railroads. So there are two laws that you need to be familiar with. You've got the Interstate Commerce Act, and I have seen this more than once on the EOC. The Interstate Commerce Act was really passed in the Gilded Age, but it was the law passed for the benefit of the farmers. So I suppose the Populist Party wanted it. It was laws designed to regulate the railroads because the railroads were screwing over the farmers. They were charging the farmers really high rates to ship their crops. And so the Congress stepped in and said, no, 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 you can't do that. And this is the first time Congress had regulated a big business. So the government is getting more involved in our lives. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that they are getting more involved. And then there's the Sherman Antitrust Act. So I hope you know what a trust is. It's basically like a monopoly. And so if you're going to bust up the trust, you're kind of busting up the monopolies. So look at this cartoon. Highway of competition. What gets in the way? Monopolistic trusts. So without competition, that's not good for the people. All right. Reasons for economic problems of the Gilded Age. Rapid growth of trust and monopolies. Ruthless business tactics of robber barons. Use of unfair practices by the railroads, such as rebates, pools, and differential rates, meaning they would charge farmers a different rate than the oil companies. One way the United States government responded to the problems caused by the conditions in this list was to do what? And the answer is A, to make sure that the railroads are acting fairly to the farmers and break up the trust between the railroads and the oil. Which of the following occurred as a result of the Sherman Antitrust Act? So think of the trust as a monopoly. Antitrust, anti-monopoly. The answer is C. I hold that a corporation does ill if it seeks profit in restricting production or seeking to achieve monopoly by illegal treatment of its competitors. If, on the other hand, a corporation seeks profit solely by treating the public and its rivals fairly, then such a corporation is behaving well. It is an instrumentality of civilization operating to promote abundance by cheapening the cost of living, so as to improve conditions everywhere throughout the whole community. So Theodore Roosevelt is talking bad about trust and monopolies. So if B looks like a tempting answer, remember, urge the Interstate Commerce Commission to decrease corporate regulations. No, Roosevelt is talking about increasing corporate regulations. So be careful. You need to be careful. Just because you see the Interstate Commerce Commission doesn't mean that's the answer. The answer is C. Use the Sherman Antitrust Act to ensure competition in industry. Be careful. Ugh, I hate this question. We conclude that this overpowering, irresistible tendency toward aggregation of capital. Aggregation means bring it all together, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And increase of size cannot be arrested or even greatly impeded. And instead of attempting to restrict either, we should hail every increase as something gained. Andrew Carnegie. So Andrew Carnegie is saying monopolies are good. Big business is good. The business practice described above eventually led to the enactment of legislation that did what? And the answer is B. No more monopolies. Bust up the monopolies. All right. Black civil rights during the Progressive era. Remember, it wasn't that good, okay? We had segregation. We had what are called Jim Crow laws, separate movie theaters, separate water fountains, separate bathrooms. Okay, these are two names that you need to be familiar with, W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Du Bois founded a civil rights group called the NAACP. It stands for National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And he believed that whites should be given equal rights to African Americans. That was their focus. Equal rights, equal protection under the law. The NAACP is an organization of lawyers, and their focus is in the courts. Booker T, he did not have faith in white people. He thought that black people need to take care of themselves. They need to educate themselves. They said, let's make the money first with job skills. Vocational education, that's job skills. Okay, vocational education is like going to air conditioning school or going to engineering school. Okay, he says that blacks should be self-reliant and take care of themselves, and then maybe whites will give them respect. But he said that African Americans need to take care of themselves and not try to get equal rights. So W.E.B. Du Bois founded the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Okay, founded in 1909. Booker T, blacks must help themselves through vocational education and self-reliance. So go to job schools like the Tuskegee Institute for vocational training. Skills to pay the bills. Okay. Now, obviously, we want both, but they had a different approach as to what their priorities should be. Okay. All right. So, how did W.E.B. Du Bois combat prejudice like that described in the excerpt? After winning the right to participate in the American experiment of self-government, African Americans were systematically and ruthlessly excluded from it. From 1901 to 1929, there were no blacks in the federal legislature. So what did W.E.B. Du Bois do to combat prejudice like that? He founded the NAACP. The answer is civil rights group. How did the person named in this 1909 handbill work to improve the lives of African Americans? What did Booker T do? He promoted vocational training for African Americans. A student learning about U.S. history is instructed to write a paper about W.E.B. Du Bois and race relations in the United States. Which of the following facts would be most relevant to the student's assignment? Okay, this is kind of a period question. Like, what time period are we talking about? And the answer is B. All right, women's suffrage. Remember, women fought really hard to get the right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony fought to get the right to vote. They did not get to see it in their lifetime. Susan B. Anthony died. Susan B. Anthony used to dress up like a man and go vote. She went to jail many times for that. She was a fighter. But in the teens, right during World War I, women fought for the right to vote. And finally, they succeeded. Here are some cartoons that are saying, men, don't let women vote, because then you'll end up wearing makeup and having to take care of the kids like a woman. Okay, so these are anti-suffrage cartoons. World War I helped women get the vote because they worked so hard during World War I. So women worked in the factories and it helped them to get respect. So the 19th Amendment, its ratification gave women suffrage due to women's work in World War I. So you need to memorize that, 19th Amendment, women's suffrage. Okay? Resolved that it is the duty of women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise. The goal of this resolution was eventually achieved with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. You see, we keep running into that word ratification. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of sex. 19th Amendment. What was one way the constitutional amendment excerpted above helped advance the cause of gender equality? Well, duh. But the answer is, hit pause if you need to, but the answer is A. I don't like this question. The issue addressed in this political cartoon was later settled by what? Okay, so what is the issue? Votes for women. Okay? The answer is ratification of the 19th Amendment. Okay, so there's a lot on the 19th Amendment, as you can see. Okay? So in summary, women did a lot during the Progressive Era. Temperance movement, muckrakers, improved access to birth control, which I didn't discuss in this, more equality in the home, in the home, suffrage, labor unions, they were part of labor unions, sometimes they were leaders, more jobs were available. All right, so the summary of the Progressive Era, you need to memorize these amendments, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 21st, have those memorized. Know these social reforms: Jane Addams, settlement houses; muckrakers, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle; more government involvement; Teddy Roosevelt's national parks. Know these political reforms: civil service exams, recall, initiative, referendum, and the secret ballot. Economic reforms: the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Interstate Commerce Act. Okay? So be familiar with all that, and